You spend 40 years doing everything right, saving, sacrificing, clocking in when your body begs for rest. You tell yourself it'll all be worth it, that someday you'll sit on a porch with a paper in one hand and peace in the other. That's the lie I lived by. Right up until the moment I found out the money was gone. All of it. And the man who took it wasn't a stranger. He was my brother. I was 63 when I put in my retirement paperwork. 2 years early, but I'd done the math 1,000 times. I had enough. My pension was solid. The 401k was healthy. House paid off. No kids in college anymore. My wife, Helen, and I had dreams, modest ones, a little camper, a trip through the national parks, maybe grandkids one day. Simple joys. Earned ones. And I had my brother, Tom. He's 5 years younger, always the money guy between us. Where I took a wrench to work every day, he took conference calls. Started his own advisory business back in the early 2000s, built a client list, knew his way around investments like I knew the sound of a clean engine. When Mom died in '09 and left us both a little something, I handed my half over to him, not because I didn't trust myself, but because I did trust him. Blindly, it turns out. He offered to manage my retirement years ago. Said I'd do better in private accounts than sticking to the company pension standard options. Talked about compounding interest, tax sheltering, smart diversification. It sounded like a foreign language, but I nodded like I understood. I was always the older brother in age, but he'd long since passed me in confidence. So I let him handle it. Every few months, he'd send me a spreadsheet, charts, projections, reassuring numbers with plenty of commas. Said we were doing great. Said we were even ahead of schedule. I believed him. And that belief, that quiet, dangerous trust, was still intact the day I drove home with a box full of desk trinkets and a framed photo of Helen and me from our 25th anniversary. We'd just finished a nice dinner, steakhouse, nothing fancy, to mark my last day on the job. My co-workers gave me a watch. My boss gave a speech. I got a little choked up. The whole thing felt like a victory lap. Then, the next morning, I sat down with Tom to talk about pulling funds from my retirement accounts to finally buy that camper. That's when the ground shifted. He looked off. Sweaty. Eyes not quite meeting mine. Said there'd been a downturn. I asked how bad. He said it would recover. I asked how much was left. And that's when he broke. Said something about crypto. About a new project, a coin that was going to change decentralized finance. He'd invested big. Too big. Said it crashed 6 months ago and hasn't bounced back. Said he had a plan, but needed more time. I stared at him. My own brother. The guy who stood beside me at my wedding. The guy who cried next to me when our dad passed. The guy who used to steal my baseball glove as a kid and give it back with a candy bar taped to it as an apology. And all I could say was, "How much is gone?" He didn't answer. Not at first. Just looked down at his hands. Then said it, a number so low I thought he misspoke. Almost everything. My pension. My savings. The IRA. The emergency fund. All gone. Swallowed by an acronym I didn't even understand. I stood up. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. I walked out of the room without a word. Drove around the neighborhood for an hour, hands shaking on the wheel. I came home to Helen waiting on the porch, excited about picking colors for the camper. I couldn't even look her in the eye. That night, I stared at the ceiling and felt something inside me give way. I wasn't just robbed. I was betrayed, by the one person I never thought would turn that kind of knife. The thing about devastation is that it doesn't always come crashing in like a storm. Sometimes it creeps, slowly, quietly, until the walls start to rot and the roof caves in, and only then do you realize what's been festering beneath the surface. That's what it felt like waking up the next morning. I didn't sleep, but I pretended to. Kept my eyes shut while Helen got out of bed, humming a little as she padded toward the kitchen. Probably already planning our trip out west. Probably thinking about sunrise coffee in Yellowstone or matching windbreakers from some tourist shop in Utah. She was happy. Because I'd told her to be. And I didn't know how to take that away. I sat at the kitchen table for an hour before I told her. Staring at the mug in my hand, listening to her talk about camper sizes and gas mileage and maybe renting one first just to be safe. Her voice soft, her smile easy, the kind of peace you only get when you think the worst is behind you. Then I said her name. Just once. And something in my voice must have told her everything, because she stopped mid-sentence. What happened? She asked. So I told her. Not all the numbers. Not every ugly detail. Just the truth. That the accounts weren't there anymore. That Tom had taken it all. That it wasn't a downturn, or a bad month in the market, it was gone. She didn't cry. Not right away. She just stared at me like I was someone she didn't quite recognize. Like she was trying to remember who I used to be, the man who promised they'd be okay, always, no matter what. Then she said. You trusted him with everything. And the word everything cracked the room wide open. That day was quiet. Heavy. She didn't yell. Didn't blame. But her silence was a sharper knife than anything I'd ever felt. Because I hadn't just lost our savings, I'd lost her sense of safety. The life she thought we were stepping into, now it was a fantasy. A mirage. And I'd let it happen. I spent that afternoon making calls. The bank. The pension office. A friend who worked as a financial planner. Each one confirming what I already knew, the accounts had been emptied. Transferred into third-party wallets. Untraceable. Uninsured. Crypto, the Wild West of finance, didn't come with seatbelts. I called Tom 3 times that day. Left 2 voicemails. No response. The 4th time, he picked up. I'm sorry, Mike. His voice was hoarse. Hollow. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. That would have been easier. Instead, I asked him what his plan was. What he expected to happen now. He said he'd been trying to double the losses. That if he could just hit on the next thing, he could make us whole again. It was going to bounce back, he kept saying. I really thought. I cut him off. You didn't just bet your money, Tom. You bet ours. My life. Her life. Our future. Without ever asking. He went quiet. Then he said the worst thing he could have said. You wouldn't have said yes. And there it was. The justification. The sentence that told me everything I needed to know. He knew it was wrong. He knew. But he thought the end might justify the theft. If he could pull off some miracle recovery, he'd be the hero instead of the villain. But he wasn't the hero. He was the man who stole my retirement, gambled it on a dream, and came back with ashes. That night, Helen and I sat on the back porch. No camper brochure. No celebration. Just quiet. 2 people staring into the dark, wondering where to go now. She asked me the question I hadn't asked myself yet. What are we going to do? And I didn't have an answer. Not yet. All I knew was that my brother, my flesh and blood, had made me start over at 63. Starting over sounds like something you do in your 30s. A fresh job. A new town. You tell yourself you've got time. You can afford to stumble. But at 63, starting over feels more like watching your house burn down and realizing the fire insurance lapsed. Helen and I spent the first week in a kind of stunned routine. She still watered the plants. I still read the news every morning. We didn't talk about the camper anymore. Didn't talk much at all, really. Just floated in that silent, bitter space where grief turns into survival instinct. We started cutting expenses. Cable went first. Then the gym membership I barely used. Then the housekeeper we hired once a month to deep clean, a luxury I now saw as pure vanity. Helen picked up some part-time work at the library. Said it was for something to do, but we both knew it wasn't about boredom. It was about dignity. I dusted off my old certifications, started calling contacts. People who knew me from back in my mechanical days. No full-time offers, of course, not for a guy my age, but a few were willing to let me freelance. Inspections. Repairs. Some consulting work. It wasn't enough to retire on. But it was enough to keep the lights on. One afternoon, I ran into an old coworker at the hardware store. He looked surprised to see me there, said, "Didn't you retire?" And I smiled the way you do when your ribs still hurt but you don't want to explain the bruise. Change of plans. That night, Helen asked me if I was angry. I said no, and I wasn't lying, not exactly. I wasn't angry anymore. That emotion had already burned through and left something quieter in its place. I was hurt. I was ashamed. And more than anything, I was disappointed, in Tom, yes, but also in myself. Because I saw the signs. I saw how cagey he got when I asked about crypto. How vague he was about the new opportunities and emerging markets. I didn't press. I didn't ask for statements or account access. I let trust replace oversight. Because he was my brother. A week later, I got a certified letter. From Tom. Inside was a handwritten note, 6 pages long, and a cashier's check for $3,000. That's it. $3,000. He said it was all he had left. That the rest was gone, swallowed up by a coin that lost 95% of its value in 6 months. He wrote about the pressure. The sleepless nights. The desperation to make it back. He wrote about Dad, how he'd always felt like the family screw-up, like I was the one who held things together and he was the one who just tried to keep up. I didn't cry reading it. But I did feel something I wasn't ready for. Pity. Because somewhere in that letter, buried under all the excuses and guilt, was a man who never felt like he was enough. And that man, that broken version of Tom, had made one last desperate grab at significance. And he'd used my life to do it. Helen asked me what I was going to do with the letter. I said I didn't know. She asked if I was going to forgive him. And that was harder. Because forgiveness, I've learned, isn't something you just give. It's something you live with. Every day you wake up and choose not to hate. Not to punish. Not to carry the weight in your chest until it hardens into bitterness. I wasn't there yet. But maybe someday. Until then, there were bills to pay. Grass to cut. Freelance jobs to finish. The future wasn't what we'd planned. But it was still ours. Grief over money isn't like grief for a person. It doesn't come with casseroles or sympathy cards. No one says, "I'm sorry for your savings." They just expect you to roll up your sleeves and figure it out. So that's what I did. I was back to work, part-time, under the table, odds and ends. Things I used to supervise from an office, I was now doing on my knees with a wrench and sore hands. Funny how life circles back around. Only this time, there wasn't a finish line. Just days stacked on top of each other. Helen kept showing up for me in quiet ways. She never said "I told you so." Never blamed me, not even once, and that hurt worse than if she had. I would have taken a fight. Yelling. Anything. But her grace. That was harder to sit with. She'd look at me sometimes, eyes soft, and I'd wonder how she could still see the man she married when I felt like a shell of him. And then, out of nowhere, came the offer. It was from a guy named Harris, someone I'd known years back from the plant, now working in facilities for a charter school network. He'd heard I was doing odd jobs again and called to see if I might be interested in a full-time gig, maintenance supervisor. Steady hours. Modest pay. Benefits. I wanted to laugh. Not because it was beneath me, far from it. But because at 63, after a lifetime of saving, I was about to start clocking in like a man still climbing the ladder. But we needed it. Not just the money. Purpose. Routine. So I said yes. First week was rough. My body didn't move the way it used to. Knees complained. Back ached. But the rhythm came back. Tools in hand, radio humming low, kids passing by in the hallway saying, "Hey, Mr. Carter." That part felt good. One afternoon, I came home to find Helen sitting on the floor, photo albums spread around her. I hadn't seen them in years, pictures from when the boys were little, vacations in cabins, birthdays in the backyard. She looked up and smiled, a little sad. "We had a good life," she said. "We still do." And I realized she wasn't mourning the money. She was mourning the promise of what we thought those golden years would look like. But she was right, we still had something. A marriage that didn't break. A roof over our heads. Dignity. And strangely enough, even some new beginnings. We started spending weekends differently. No fancy trips or new camper. But we'd pack sandwiches and drive to small towns nearby, antique shops, lakeside parks, bookstores. It wasn't what we planned, but it became ours. Then, one evening, I got another envelope from Tom. No check this time. Just a photo, a picture of us as kids, arms slung over each other's shoulders, muddy and grinning after a baseball game. Tucked inside was a note. "I know I can't fix this. But I hope someday you remember the version of me that didn't ruin everything. The version who looked up to you more than anyone." I sat with that photo for a long time. Not angry. Not heartbroken. Just tired. Because the truth is, he was that version once. Before the desperation. Before the greed. Before the idea that he had to prove something at my expense. And maybe he'll find his way back to that version again. Maybe not. But I wasn't holding my breath. Some wounds don't close all the way. But they stop bleeding. Some things don't get fixed, they just get lived with. That's what I told myself the day I ran into Tom again. It was a Sunday. Helen and I were sitting outside a little diner we liked to visit after church. Same booth we always took. Her with the pancakes and fruit, me with the eggs and black coffee. Peaceful. Comfortable. The kind of ritual that says we're still here. Then I looked up, and there he was. Tom. He hadn't seen me yet. Was coming out of the corner store next door, brown bag in hand. He looked smaller than I remembered. Same frame, sure, but like he'd lost something that couldn't be measured in weight. Shoulders hunched. Hair more gray than I remembered. He looked like a man who'd been living in the shadow of a mistake for too long. Helen saw him too. She set her fork down. Didn't say a word. Tom spotted us just as he stepped off the curb. He froze. For a second, I thought he'd turn around. But instead, he walked over, slowly, like every step was a coin being flipped in his head. "Mike," he said. I nodded. Didn't stand. Didn't shake his hand. Helen looked at him, not with anger, but with a kind of firm kindness that only she could manage. Tom fumbled for words. Said he hadn't expected to see us. That he wasn't even living in town anymore. Just back visiting someone. Asked if we were doing okay. I didn't answer that. Because what does okay even mean after your world gets wiped clean? Finally, he said it. "I'm sorry." Not whispered. Not dodged. Just, out there. I ruined your plans. Your trust. I stole something from you I can't give back. And I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed to say it anyway. It took me a second to realize how long I'd been gripping my coffee cup. My knuckles were white. I looked at him, really looked at him, and said the first honest thing I'd said to him in over a year. You didn't just take my money, Tom. You took my finish line. I worked 4 decades for that moment, and you made me cross it with nothing in my hands. He swallowed hard. Nodded. I know. And he did. You could see it on his face. The guilt. The weight. He glanced at Helen. You never deserved that either. She looked at him, expression unreadable. No, I didn't. But here we are. That was it. No drama. No reunion. Just 3 people standing at the edge of something that used to be called family, trying to find the pieces worth keeping. Before he left, he said he was working construction out in Kansas now. Living light. Paying debts, not financial ones, because those were already dust. But personal ones. Said he hoped I'd be able to retire again someday. Not the way you planned, he said. But maybe better. Slower. Wiser. He walked off without asking for anything. And I watched him go with something I hadn't expected to feel. Not forgiveness. Not closure. Just, peace. Because I finally saw what I'd been dragging behind me. And I let it go. They tell you retirement is a finish line. That you'll cross it with a grin and a pension check, and everything after that is one long, earned exhale. Turns out, that's a fairy tale. But the truth? It's better in its own way, if you let it be. It's been a year since the collapse. Since the accounts vanished, since the future Helen and I planned went up in smoke. A year since I stood in my brother's shadow, holding a letter full of excuses and a check that wouldn't cover a month of groceries. And yet, here we are. Not in a camper, not sipping wine beneath the redwoods, but on our porch, with coffee in hand, wrapped in a blanket Helen knitted back when our youngest left for college. The leaves have started to fall again, and the quiet between us. It doesn't ache like it used to. It breathes. We've found a new rhythm. I'm still working part-time at the school. They even gave me a set of keys and started calling me Mr. Mike. I fix lockers, swap out ceiling tiles, clear snow in the winter. It's honest work. No desk. No suits. Just the creak of old floors and the noise of young lives in motion. Helen still volunteers at the library, but she also started teaching a Saturday morning class on journaling for women over 50. Says it's the most laughter she's heard in one room since our kids were toddlers. We don't talk about the money anymore. Not because we forgot. But because we stopped letting it define what we still had. We have each other. We have mornings like this. We have the strength to bend when life tried to break us. As for Tom, I haven't heard from him since that day outside the diner. And I think that's okay. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not waiting for anything either, not payback, not healing, not closure. I've learned that some wounds don't ask to be stitched up. They just ask to stop being picked at. Sometimes Helen catches me staring off, especially when I see an RV commercial or an old travel magazine tucked into the bookshelf. She'll squeeze my hand and say, "We still get to go places. They're just different than we planned." She's right. A few months ago, we rented a little cabin in the woods for the weekend. Nothing fancy. We brought groceries, played cards, sat on the porch and watched deer walk the edge of the trees. And for those 2 days, it felt like enough. More than enough. We made a photo album of the trip, called it, "The Retirement That Wasn't." It sits on our coffee table now, between the coasters and a candle our daughter gave us for Christmas. People flip through it when they visit. Smile at the simple snapshots. They don't see the story behind them, and that's okay. Because that story, that's for us. Not the one where everything went right. The one where everything went wrong. And we still found a way to stand.